I think this is probably as good a place to start as any other. This is the European Long Distance Hiking Trail, number 10, the E10 for short. It starts from its northern terminus here at Kap Arkona on the island of Rügen on the Baltic Sea and runs 104 kilometers around the island until it reaches the German mainland at Stralsund in the south. I hiked this section of the trail in September over a week. It runs along chalk cliffs and beaches and forests and bike paths and fields and across farmland and through towns. What's interesting to me about this trail, though, is that from here it continues southward, extending around the city of Berlin, then down to Cottbus, along the Polish border, and then into Czechia, to Prague, and then down into the Austrian Alps, and eventually the Italian Alps, where it ends at Bolzano. It's part of a network of trails. There are 12 of them, the European long-distance hiking paths. Some of them extending far longer than this trail. The E10 is about 2,700 kilometers, but some of them are over 10,000. I wanted to hike this section of trail because it made for a fairly coherent and compact test case for hiking the trail as a whole. It has a very defined start point and end point that ends up having a length that fits really well for about a week-long hike. And it would give me the chance to test out the trail for things like trail conditions, elevation changes, and whatever the surface might be. And it would also provide me with a way to see how feasible it would be to find overnights for setting up my tent, or for finding resupply spots in towns or shops along the way. I was interested in this as a test case because eventually I would like to see if it's possible to hike one of these long-distance hiking paths as a start-to-finish through hike. The way that we hike in the United States, what I'm going to be referring to as the American Triple Crown, the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. Those trails are all fairly well known in the hiking community, and there are guidebooks and websites and YouTubers that provide you with all kinds of information for how to prepare for those hikes and what you can expect on them, what kind of condition you should be in, what kind of condition you're likely to encounter in terms of weather or trail conditions, what kind of gear you should have. But that kind of information was not very easy to find for the European equivalents, if they are equivalent at all. I don't know yet. And so I wanted to test all of that and see if, in fact, this was also a kind of long-distance trail that could be hiked as a through hike in the same way that we hike those trails in the United States. I wanted to do that for myself because I feel like it's very unlikely that I'm going to have the chance in my life to go back to the United States and hike those trails as a through hike at some point. And so these are the trails that I have. I might as well hike them. But I also wanted to hike these trails and document the endeavor because I wanted to raise awareness about the long-distance hiking paths in Europe as a whole. Like I said, the literature out there is difficult to find. There's not a whole lot of it. The one guidebook that exists is now 20 years old, and a lot of the information in it is not very accurate, including on the island of Rügen. It follows the trail to a very different side of the island about midway through. So where are we? Let's take stock. This is the map of the long-distance hiking paths as it stands right now as I'm recording this in late 2023. As you can see, there are a few gaps here and there, but the network in general covers the entire European continent. Some of these extensions are very new. They're not in the guidebook I have at all. There was recently, for example, a section of about 600 kilometers that was just opened in Romania. That was over the summer. And like I said about the section of the E10 that I was hiking on Rügen, that too has changed in the 20 years since the guidebook was published. So the network is constantly changing and expanding, and I think this is part of what makes these trails so appealing to me. There's a certain ambition in the idea of doing a through hike that might cover a couple thousand kilometers, might take you 3 or 4 months. But this is a very different order of ambition, I think. Like I said, these trails some of them are 10,000 kilometers long, some of them extend all the way across the European continent, and it's very easy to cross from one onto the other. There's a crossing with, I think, the E5, not very far away, so I could easily take a trail over a ridgeline and down into the next valley, meet up with the E5, take that down onto the Mediterranean coast. From there I could connect up to, I think, the E7 or maybe the E12, hike all the way down to Gibraltar. If I wanted to go the other way, I could connect with a different set of trails that cross around the Balkans and move toward, I think, Bulgaria and Romania, and eventually down into Greece, where one of them ends near the Turkish border. So this is where I'm going to start. The video that you've been watching and all the rest of this video is footage that I shot on my first day of what was a week-long hike around the island of Rügen. The image is kind of hazy. That's because the weather itself was rather hazy. It clears up on later days. There was a terrible rainstorm in between that I got caught in, but after that the air cleared up really nicely. So later footage is quite brilliant and sunny. But I wanted to get a sense of what it was like. Like I said, I don't really know how easy it is to hike one of these trails, and there isn't a lot of information out there that tells you, so I just wanted to try it myself to find out. It turns out it's not terribly difficult. I mean, this is obviously very flat terrain. It's very easy to walk along, but on the other hand, there aren't really any set up overnights like there are if you're going to hike one of the trails of the American Triple Crown. It's not a big park that has shelters and campsites set up at regular intervals where you can stop and set up your tent. So some nights I was sleeping on some farmer's field. One night I was in an apple orchard. Another night I was set up to, I think, just camp in a private campsite that was really more set up for holiday campers in camper vans and coming with their cars and staying in cabins and that sort of thing. But they had a little bit of space on the side where I could set up a tent, and it was fine. So part of learning how to hike these trails then has been figuring out all the different ways that you have to adapt what I think is sort of our stereotypical image of what it's like to through hike, to hiking through a country that really doesn't have the large untouched wildernesses like the kind you can find in the United States. The other reason I wanted to go on this hike, and I wanted to document it, and I wanted to gain an experience of what it's like to hike these trails, is because eventually I do want to see just how far I can go to tackle one of these trails as a complete through hike. I realize that's probably getting a bit ahead of myself right now. I'm not in any way any kind of professional hiker. I don't do this full time. I don't have that much experience hiking trails like this, but I have hiked long distance trails in the past, and I have gone on week-long hikes before. So I'm comfortable with that level of commitment to a long distance trail. What I want to start doing, however, is building myself up to hiking longer and longer sections of this. It's fairly convenient for me to hike the E10 because I reside in Berlin and the E10 wraps around the city. So as I was preparing for this hike along the island of Rügen, I was also going on day hikes along a section of the E10 further south as it wrapped around the city. I've put in another, I think, 150 kilometers onto that part of the E10. So I've already seen some other parts of the trail, at least in the northern part of Germany and the kind of sand dune terrain that is prevalent up here. I do, however, want to make this into a larger scale project. I want to see if it's possible. When I called up the office for the European Ramblers Association, that's the umbrella group that manages the trail network as a whole in partnership with the local and regional authorities, they told me they didn't really have any records of people hiking these trails in their total length. It's not like in the United States where that's a thing that people seem to do. And that, I think, is where we can start. I'm going to be using this channel, then, to document my efforts to build myself up, both physically and just in terms of experience, so that I can hike these trails as through hikes. I will be doing short section hikes along the way. There's a lot of work between now and then, but this is as good a place as any to start. I'm going to be posting a few more videos from my hike on Rügen, just so you can get an idea of the landscape and how the weather changes, and posting some of the campsites and some of the other things I saw along the way. I'm going to be talking through all of those videos. Unfortunately, my camera's microphone switched off right at the very beginning of the hike and I didn't notice. So all of those videos are without audio, but future hikes, once I start going on them, I have a different camera that works better and has its own audio. So we'll be doing that for a while. I'm interested to see how it works out, and I hope you will follow along with me as we go along. If you have questions about what I do, I also have a Substack and a Mastodon account. They're linked down in the description. And I'll be posting to a few other social media sources as well. There will be photos and comment sections and all that usual stuff. I hope it's interesting for you. I'm really looking forward to it myself. So let's get started.